Good evening. Welcome to our special meeting of Municipal Council for Tuesday, April 16th, 2024, 6 p.m., Town of East Gwillimbury. I'd like to call this meeting to order at this time and ask if there's any interests. Good evening. Welcome to the Town of East Gwillimbury Special Council meeting. At this time, I'll call the meeting to order. Are there any declarations of interest from members of council? I'm not seeing any at this time. I would like to do the land acknowledgement. There we go. The Town of East Gwillimbury recognizes and acknowledges the lands originally used and occupied by the First Peoples of the Williams Treaties First Nation and other Indigenous peoples, and on behalf of Council, I thank them for sharing this land. We also acknowledge the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation as East Gwillimbury's closest First Nation community and recognize the unique relationship the Chippewas have with the lands and the waters of this territory. They are the water protectors and the environmental stewards of these lands, and we join them in these responsibilities. We will now move to item D, which is deputations. And we have several this evening. First one is W. English making a deputation to council regarding item F.1 confirming by-law. Is Mr. English? You are here. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. This is my second time here, so I'm a little bit more comfortable, but not terribly comfortable. So.
Take your time and just make sure you are comfortable enough to say what you need.
All right, thank you. I'd like to begin. Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of council and support staff. My name is Warren English, and I live in Mount Albert. Just to be clear, these are my opinions. There's no guarantee anywhere. I became aware of this bylaw last Friday and was suspicious of the content of the bylaw being vague but with important information. Questions like what it has to be or why it has to be confirmed, what has changed from the last bylaw confirmation form, has the terminology changed and why? I was told that this form is a standard and commonly used document that has been used quite often. Just a standard and common form that requires a special meeting of the council. Most of my concerns would have been addressed with the addition of supporting details, references, or explanations in this notice, but were not. I guess in recent years, I have become skeptical of government's small actions developing into more and taking away from the public's control. If a resident is not proactive or able to follow East Gwillimbury media outlets or online information because of their lifestyle, job, and family commitments, but they know something is wrong, which I believe the majority of the residents are in this category. There is no way that they can be informed of this council's actions and are excluded in the process and the opportunity to have a voice in our community. I have talked to many residents who are aware of what is slowly going on in our town. To me, this is proof the town media is not getting to the majority of the taxpayers. I received a notice of construction yesterday in the mail regarding the town project. A flyer like this on a monthly schedule from the town would be a perfect means of letting all taxpayers know the subject is of upcoming council meetings, to be able to attend one of these they are interested in without having to be proactive. Now, if I'm misreading this bylaw message, and it is a different meaning, then it's obvious that that it is not written for the general residents of this council, residents of this council, of which this council is supposed to be obligated to present and inform. We, the public, need to know what is going on in our community from our elected representatives. Only through better communication with more of us can this council be a true voice for the residents and not for big businesses whom are in it for the profit. Thank you. Okay, and we have any questions,
Thank you very much.
concerns?
Questions of the deputant? I'm not seeing any. Oh, sorry, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, through you, Madam Chair. And I would like to pick up on a couple of the questions that you asked Mr. English. Thank you very much for your deputation. I think you have a valid question in asking about the vagueness of the agenda tonight that we are dealing with, and I would like to ask the staff, through you, Madam Mayor, to answer where the actual report is that we have conveyed this meeting for tonight, and how we can expect deputants to speak to the issues without having any details at hand.
Was there a particular staff member that you were addressing? I'm sorry if I didn't catch that.
Perhaps the town solicitor would like to answer the question. Yeah. Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Councillor, the question, could you repeat the question, please?
Thank you very much. Through you, Madam Chair. The question is how we can expect a deputant to speak to the issues on the agenda if they don't have the report before them to have details. And I believe that was the first question that you asked, Mr. English. Thank you.
So through you, Madam Mayor, thank you for the question. There is no report on the agenda because tonight is a workshop, an education workshop for council. So if the deputant has questions with respect to procedure, which I think the deputant's deputation was about, he was asking specifically, if I may, about what's a confirmatory bylaw or confirming bylaw. Is that the nature of the question,
Right.
sir?
Yeah.
I can address that if you wish. That the confirming bylaw is a bylaw that's required under the Municipal Act for municipal council, such as the one that we're in tonight, to confirm their decisions and resolutions that they make at a council meeting. So there's nothing hidden or nefarious about a confirming bylaw. It's simply a bylaw that confirms the decisions of council made at that meeting. So I think I've addressed that question, if I may. And in terms of the report, if the deputant has any other questions, certainly you can send them in to us and we'll receive them. We're always happy to engage with the public in terms of if they have questions or they have some concerns. You've raised a couple of them in your deputation. We can certainly address them. So thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. Thank you very much for your clarification, and I will learn from this. Thank you. All right.
Councillor LaHaye, did you have another item?
Yes, thank you
Go
very
ahead,
much,
please.
Madam Mayor. I had one follow-up question. I'm wondering if the town solicitor can explain the difference then for the members of the public who have joined us tonight, the difference between a procedural bylaw meeting rather than a confirmation.
The two concepts, through you, Madam Mayor, if I may, The confirmatory bylaw is a bylaw that's required under the Municipal Act to confirm the decisions made at a council meeting. So at every single council meeting that we have, there must be a confirmatory bylaw, because the only way a municipal council has authority to make a decision is by bylaw. So rather than having a bylaw, which is a written form of bylaw for every act or every decision council makes in a meeting, it's just practically impractical to do it that way. You have a confirmatory bylaw at the end. And so that's how municipal councils actually put into effect the decisions they make. Without it, there is no decision, because they don't have authority to act without a bylaw. The procedure bylaw is quite different than a confirmatory bylaw. So tonight, for members of the public, and I know there's a few members of the public that are interested in making deputations with respect to the procedure bylaw, and we certainly welcome those deputations, because we are in the process of actually updating our procedure bylaw, so that's not a secret. So your deputations are welcome. But a procedure bylaw is different than a confirmatory bylaw. What the procedure bylaw is a bylaw that governs the proceedings of council. So when council is sitting in this chamber, they must follow the rules of procedure, which is embodied in their procedure bylaw. So a procedure bylaw is very important, because it gives council basically the manual about how to act, how things are done in procedures during council. So for instance, give you an example. If somebody makes a comment and another council member feels that that's sort of out of order, then the procedure bylaw tells them how they can address that particular issue. That's what a procedure bylaw does. And tonight's workshop is meant to discuss with council the current procedure bylaw and maybe some improvements to the current procedure bylaw. So the deputants and the deputations that are brought forward at this meeting are very timely and will be well received in terms of their suggestions and their content.
I'm not seeing any other comments or questions. I wonder if Councillor Crone, you would move the presentation, and Councillor LaHaye, would you second that? Please be it resolved that the deputation made by W. English regarding Item F.1 Confirming By-law be received. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. The next item we have on our agenda is Mr. Gamble. I believe, is Mr. Gamble here tonight? Welcome. Good to have you with us this evening.
Good evening, Mayor, councillors, audience. The purpose right now is the public engagement section that we got sent. And I'll address a few of the items that are in the procedures. The weekend extension for a request for deputation. I'm gratified to read that Council is considering extending the deputation request submission from 24 hours, Friday 12 o'clock, to Monday. The stated purpose of this change is to allow residents the weekend to formulate a more considered request. May I point out, I made the same request in 2018-19 when we presented to Council concerning the environmental planning issues. At that time, Council indicated they would forward the suggestion to staff for further review. That was 5 or 6 years ago. This represents only one of the numerous requests I made concerning deputation procedures in an effort to further public participation. Could this move have been prompted only as a result of the constitutional challenge I recently filed, re-deputation procedures? If so, while the move is in the right direction, it is woefully late. On to the 5-minute time limit. The review proposes to retain the 5-minute limit for deputations, stating that 8 out of 10 of the York Region municipalities do so. Is sliding through a stop sign without stopping acceptable? Because most people do it. Of course not. Many topics cannot be properly addressed in 5 minutes. I have personally witnessed in this council chambers presentations that were approved by council that were 20 minutes or more. I might add that these presentations were either requested or approved by council on subjects they were interested in or fit the current agenda. Is it not the purpose of council to weigh the pros and cons making an informed decision? Surely a deputant should have the right to state that his deputation will require X amount of time to adequately cover the topic at hand. With the average number of deputations being 0.8 per council meeting, this hardly represents a serious impediment to the efficient running of council. Other procedures that deserve consideration: adequate public notice of upcoming meetings. Case in point, this special meeting did not appear in the town's weekly newsletter of April the 5th. And that is something now that the newspapers are gone, the public depends on for notification. As late as April 12th, there was no notification of the special meeting, unless you specifically were to navigate to the agendas of the council meetings. Why would you do so if it wasn't mentioned in this newsletter? I might add that at 11:59 this morning, an email was sent out informing people of a meeting, a special meeting, at 6 o'clock tonight. Do I really have to comment on the timeliness of that document? And I should mention as well that I would request a 7 p.m. start, not a 6 p.m. People are working, they're getting home, they got the kids to feed, blah, 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 blah. On the item of consent of council to be heard.
Please, Mummy, let me speak.
Forgive the dramatic entrance. Excuse me, do we not encourage our residents to participate in the decision-making process? If so, then it follows that their appearance at council should be actively solicited, rather than erecting roadblocks to discourage them. Since when it is the right of council, or for that matter anyone, to be the arbiter of person's right to freely express his opinion? You have at your disposal the experience of thousands of resident person hours. Surely valuable life experience is worth a few moments of consideration. Only one group representative. Section 13.4 provides the council can direct that one person in a group that wishes to address to represent the group in its entirety, irrespective of different and distinct views which may be submitted by members of the group. I cannot think of a better way to shut down dissent, disagreement, or to discourage meaningful suggestions than this statement. Irrespective of groups' beliefs, there will be many diverse opinions on the importance of individual issues, which may not be covered by one person. Surely each person has the right to have his opinion, his or her opinion, read. Prior approval to present. Okay. Section 13.7 of the bylaw provides that a written outline of the nature of the deputation to be delivered by the deputant before he's allowed to be heard. Despite this provision being revoked by bylaw 2011-076, the town's published procedures consider to demand this be enforced. They have refused deputations submitted without this documentation. It would appear we're basically facing a moving target. I'm going to leave that part of the deputation finished. Under next steps, there are 5 of them. Present report with draft procedures bylaw. Solicit feedback from council. Present final version of the bylaw. Training for council members and staff, continuous monitoring of future reviews. Council has frequently criticized deputants for not appearing to object to their proposals until step 3, presentation of the version of the bylaw, decrying the time wasted by staff. may I suggest the main reason for this is that until the draft version of the bylaw, or at least a well-fleshed-out version, is available, how can we possibly comment on it? There's nothing to comment on. I would suggest a very simple solution. Item number 2, solicit feedback from council and residents. We have something to look at. I found that topics that appear in the newsletters are extremely vague. They are something that would not catch your attention. If you say something like, oh, we're planning an overall review of such and such. That's nice. Doesn't mean anything until we see some details. But according to the way the next steps are read, we won't get to see the details until you have a proposed bylaw. Then people will come and complain about things, and you'll say, well, why are you doing this now? Well, we're doing it now because it's the first we've really heard of anything we could possibly speak to. So please forgive my being a little sharp at some times, but things tend to drag on. Basically, I think that pretty much sums it up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Johns, Councillor Crothers, could I have you move and second this, please? Be it resolved that the deputation made by Jay Gamble regarding Item E.1, Legal and Legislative Services Presentation.
Madam Mayor, if I could, I see that Councillor Legge has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I would like to thank Mr. Gamble for his presentation, and I can't overstate the importance in the democratic process that we respectfully listen to diverse opinions from our community. I think that that's paramount to our doing our job with due diligence as councillors and for the municipality of East Gwillimbury. And I appreciate your comments with regard to communicating in a timely way. I'm sure that we've heard your suggestions, and there's always room for improvement in the future. So my question is, again, through you, Madam Mayor, for the town solicitor, which is, can we provide the deputant and the members of the community who have joined us here tonight, as well as online, with a timeline for opportunities in the future when the public will be able to speak to the draft of the procedural bylaws when it comes before us in the future, and what that timeline might look like?
Through you, Madam Mayor, thank you for the question, and it surrounds the timeline and the public's involvement in that process. So with respect to the timeline, I can advise the members of council and the audience that we are in the process of still doing our due diligence with respect to any concerns, questions, suggestions, proposed changes that this council wishes to communicate with staff. In terms of who sort of holds the pen with respect to a procedure bylaw, typically the staff at the municipality headed up by the clerk's office. In this particular case, this is the case in point. The clerk's office holds the pen and will draft iterations of the bylaw for council's review. In terms of the public's involvement in that process, it's very clear that there are some interested residents who are here tonight who would like to be part of that process. Typically, that doesn't involve sort of a hands-on approach from the residents. We would expect that your concerns would be raised with your member of council, and then they could share with staff. That might be the most expeditious way to address it, because as you can probably appreciate, if we were to have a number of people involved in drafting a procedure bylaw, it would probably take a lot longer than our council would really want us to take. But that doesn't mean your concerns are not going to be raised with us, because I've written down the ones, Mr. Gamble, that you've raised in your deputation, and I'm also aware of the ones you've raised in your proceeding with respect to the constitutionality issue that you have pending with the town. So we're aware of that, but it's a difficult thing to say what the timeline, to answer Councillor Leahy's question, because there are not only members of council that has to provide information to us, we also have to draft it, and we are also looking at best practices. So it's not that we haven't taken into account some of the concerns that you've already raised. We have. They might not have made its way into the previous bylaw, but I assure you, sir, we're going to take those into account in the next iteration of the bylaw. Whether or not we distribute that to members of the public, that would not be my decision, but that would affect the timeline that Councillor Leahy is questioning. So unfortunately, I can't give you a timeline without having that kind of process piece addressed first by this council, and I don't think that's the forum tonight to do that. So, however, that's the best I can do at the moment, given the variables that I don't control.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, one final question for our town solicitor. So would it be fair to say that tonight's a little bit premature if we don't have detailed information to share?
Madam Mayor, if I might, just
ahead.
through to Councillor Leahy. I think tonight is very important, and I think that what members of the public can do is look at our existing bylaw and express where they have concerns, suggestions, recommendations. So there absolutely is something they can look at, the existing bylaw. And I believe that's what the residents have done. I very much appreciate the comments that we're hearing from both deputants so far this evening, because that's what we need to hear as we contemplate what we might bring back. So I very much want to thank the deputants and the folks that have come out and expressed an interest in what they see as potential areas of interest to them in relation to our existing bylaw. And I think that's the most relevant input we can hear at this point in time as we prepare to try and bring something back to you for your consideration.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification in terms of next steps. So you're saying that the public can send in written commentary on the procedural bylaws during this process. Am I correct? Yeah.
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor, we would be very happy to receive that feedback, and we would also entertain calls as well from Mr. Gamble in particular.
Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think it's really important for our, as we're reviewing and revising this bylaw, for it to reflect our own practices. So, for example, the idea that only one person per group may speak is written in the bylaw, but our practice has been to let anyone who wanted to speak to do so. And it was our request that, you know, if you have something new to add, please participate in this process. So I think from our perspective, it's about what we've actually been doing, not necessarily what the letter of the bylaw says. So we want those two things to match. And obviously, the feedback that we've had from our two deputants today has been very helpful. There's been a request for longer deputations. And we've seen a lot of deputants come and say, I have a lot to share and I don't know if I can do it in 5. And we say, you know what, it's okay. Maybe you could wrap it up at 8. And that happens. So maybe we do need to consider that. And then the idea of, or the feedback regarding our communications being more timely, it's not helpful for someone to be on Facebook today to say, hey, guess what, there's a meeting at 6 o'clock tonight. My family's week is planned well in advance. So maybe we do need to take that feedback into consideration and say, you know what, we're gonna make it part of our regular communications to say, what's council and staff working on this month? And we're going to put it up at the beginning of the month because we have a pretty decent idea what's going to happen or what's going to be on the agenda for the next 2 meetings. So maybe that's the feedback that we need to receive, and thank the residents for being here and sharing that with us. So I also appreciate the feedback. It's actually really, really clear for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Other comments, questions? I will go back to Councillor Johns and Councillor Carruthers, if you would. Thank you very much. Be it resolved that the deputation made by Jay Gamble regarding Item E.1, Legal and Legislative Services Presentation Procedure Bylaw Review Workshop be received. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you very much for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. We are at item number 3 on our agenda, and we have a presentation from Jay Petejan, making a deputation to council regarding Item F.1 Confirming By-law. Welcome. Good to have you with us this evening.
Well, thank you, Madam Mayor and councillors, for allowing me to present today. And it's nice to see you back in the big chair,
Thank you.
Madam Mayor. Before I start my deputation, I'd like to thank the lawyer, the solicitor, for explaining the different procedures and the bylaws. But the notice that I received by email, it didn't say any of that. What it did say in the second paragraph, and it was not to do with bylaw procedures. It says, municipalities are hereby authorized and directed to do all things necessary to give effect to the said motions, resolutions, and other actions, and to obtain approvals where required and except where otherwise provided. The head or acting head of council and the clerk and the treasurer are hereby authorized to execute all documents necessary in that behalf, and the clerks hereby authorized and directed to affix the corporate seal of the municipality to all such documents. So I just was a little confused, and maybe the communications needs to be a little better in what we send out, and I think that's what the other 2 deputants were really going after and asking for. But the other thing that is not in this notice is that there's no notice that this is a special workshop. Not even it's a workshop or a meeting. And at the very bottom, it says enacted and passed. Well, what's been enacted and what's been passed? I thought we're just giving our input. Anyways, I can get to my, my deputation now. Thank you for the extra moment of time. I will be referring to the Corporation of the Town of East Gwillimbury as EG. My deputation is in my own opinion. I would like to express my concerns about the notice for the procedural bylaw changes without proper transparency or taxpayers' input. In reading the special meeting details, I was surprised to see what 2 small paragraphs contained, as I read one of them. The notice has the potential to limit or merge multiple issues to council. All issues need to be reviewed by our elected members, no matter how big or how small that impact is to taxpayers or residents. They need to be reviewed directly. The municipality presentation is very colorful, just like the strategic plan, where there is no mention of taxpayers or residents. With an important issue such as this, without informing taxpayers or residents, it's not acceptable. This is what I see. There has been a failure in communicating this meeting to taxpayers and residents. A lack of detail, communicating only 2 paragraphs. Reference of head of council or acting head of council requires clear designation of the title. Head of council is our mayor. Mayor and councilors are the only elected officers. Municipal officers should be clearly identified in the notice. Grouping motions and recommendations together, who will determine what motions are important or not? All motions are important. Municipal officers are employees. They are hired and released by their immediate supervisors. Their responsibilities are to their administrators, not the residents or the taxpayers. What checks and balances will there be in place and to avoid any misjudgment, favoritism, or advantages given to any group? What alarms me most is the failure to be open and transparent. I say this as a new resident in EG. My first deputation to council over a year ago, the topic, 15-minute cities. Well, since then, the only thing that has changed is the name. It's now Complete Communities. At their strategic plan presentation, it was said that the municipalities made numerous contacts with residents through surveys, website, door-to-door, to inform residents. I asked for that information twice and nothing was offered. I received it through other means. A town of 38,000 people approximately, 27 people provided feedback. So, 27 people, whoever they are, whoever approved it, was approving hundreds of millions of dollars in municipal spending. We have a climate emergency that no one seems to know about, yet we've hired people and allocated a budget. A councillor mentioned that one of the earlier deputations at EG is physically responsible with a surplus of about $150 million in operations and reserves. So why did our taxes go up more than 5%? The approval of 5G towers. Do any of you know what the allowable EMF radiation is from these towers? How about the 6G towers that are coming? The EMF radiation will be far more harmful to children and seniors. Are you aware of that? A recent open house presentation, EG Complete Communities Secondary Plan. This wasn't the secondary plan. This is the plan, which is part of the strategic plan. Lastly, why wasn't this posted where everyone could see it and read it? There was no mention in the weekly newsletter or the communications letter, which I subscribe to, and I do look at it. All this, and I've only lived in EG 1 year. Why is there such a lack of transparency? Why are residents and taxpayers isolated from hearing complete information to what happens behind closed doors? How strange is this? A special meeting at 6 o'clock called a workshop. This council adheres to several federal, provincial, regional, and non-government organization directives laid down by the United Nations, the World Health Organization, the World Bank, World Economic Forum, ICLEI, the International Council of Local Environmental Initiatives, the Federation of Municipalities, stakeholders, private, public, partnerships, and of course, a strong mayor powers. All of this impacts taxpayers in one way or another. I've attached a statement of principles, which I gave to the clerk, created by the Civis for Reform group. And I strongly suggest you read it. It's your guidelines to adhering to human rights and the duties of government. This is what you'll be judged on in the next election. I have copies of it if you wish. Thank you very much. And if there are any questions, I would be more than happy to answer.
Thank you very much. Questions of the presentation? I'm not seeing any.
Thank you again very much.
Thank-
And nice to see you back,
Thank
Mayor.
you very much. I'm wondering if I could have Councillor Foster and Councillor Roy DiClemente move Mr. Petejan's presentation. Presentation making a deputation to council regarding Item F.1 Confirming By-law. Be it resolved that the deputation regarding F.1 Confirming By-law be received.
Madam Mayor, if, just prior to the vote for the comments, I know it was moved and seconded, so speaking to it, if we could just ensure that Mr. Petejan's attachment that was received by the clerk, if we could make sure that it was circulated to council, that would be appreciated. Thanks.
I'll make a note. Thank you. It was. Thank you. Okay, all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you very much. We are at item E in our agenda this evening, and this is our workshop portion, legal and legislative services presentation, procedure bylaw review workshop.
While, through you, Madam Mayor, while Andrew gets set up at the lectern to address the, the workshop tonight, I'd like to give some preliminary comments about the procedure bylaw and where we've come from and where we're going, and Andrew can fill in more of the details when he speaks. But in order to frame the discussion tonight, and for members of the audience that have joined us as well. We started on this process about a year ago in terms of looking at our procedure bylaw, realizing, having heard from members of the public and also members of council, that there were some parts of the procedure bylaw and maybe parts of our procedures that we needed to address, that we could maybe improve upon, some to address some of the issues that the deputants raised tonight, which, you know, had to do with transparency, the public's, you know, wish to be involved, wish to be informed, wish to be informed sooner. You know, the timelines, they mentioned a couple of them in terms of, you know, there's not a lot of time to put in a deputation request. There's not a lot of time to know that a meeting is coming up. So those are real issues to the public, and we take those seriously. So along this journey, as members of council know, the clerk's office and myself and me, we spoke with each of you about your concerns. You shared those with us, and some of those gave rise to some themes that Andrew will be talking about tonight, to sort of hone in on some of the issues that you know, have crept into this, so that when we do our next iteration of the procedure bylaw, it will address some of these concerns that have been raised tonight. The other thing I should mention is that while this process started a year ago, and some might say, what's taken so long, you don't get from A to Z overnight in a complex environment in which we now operate. Mr. Petejan mentioned the strong mayor's powers. So the strong mayor's powers has impacted our procedures. It's impacted our procedure bylaw. The impact of the strong mayor's legislation has to be taken into account when we do our next iteration of the bylaw. So there are things that are outside of our control at the staff level and outside of your control at council level when legislation is passed, and we have to make sure that we address new legislation in our procedures. So those give you a sense of sort of where we've been and what we've done thus far with respect to the bylaw. We did not put an amended bylaw in front of this council tonight because we're not there yet. We haven't received all your feedback. We now have further feedback. Thank you for the audience for sharing their feedback with us. And when we incorporate that feedback and when we do the next iteration of the bylaw, if there are members of the audience that have spoken or are sitting in the audience and wish to see something, we will share that with people. We're not trying to be secretive or less than transparent. It is not our intention to do that at the staff level. That may appear to be what you might think has happened, but that's not and never will be our intention. Thank you for your feedback, and I'm turning it now over to the specific issues that Andrew will address in his part of this presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council, and residents for coming tonight's procedure bylaw review workshop. So just in terms of format for the presentation, we're hoping this is much more of an interactive session with council. We really are looking for feedback from council on some of the main themes that we'll walk through tonight. So this really is, if you will, a first blush on this process. So just to begin quickly by looking at the agenda for the presentation tonight, the reasons for the review are where we'll start, and then Janice has already touched on the project background, how we got here basically today, the emerging themes that we are addressing tonight and will be throughout the process to review the procedure bylaw. Probably number 4 there is the biggest one, because again, we are hoping to hear from council tonight with their feedback, and then finally the next steps in the process going forward. And just to begin, probably best if we start by defining what a procedure bylaw is. It is required by the Municipal Act, and the requirement is a bylaw that governs the callings, place, and proceedings of the meetings of council. So it also becomes a tool for council to use by setting out the rules of procedure for its meetings. So it is specifically about council's meetings and how they operate. So just to begin, why now are we reviewing the procedure bylaw? We've already touched on some of the legislative changes that have come up. The procedure bylaw actually dates back to 2009, and throughout that period there have been a number of legislative changes, and there have been amendments through that time to the procedure bylaw that have amended the bylaw to keep up with those legislative changes, but obviously those need to be fully incorporated into the main text. And then we also do need to respond to some of the new legislation. Straw mayor powers is one of the most current examples. As the council works with the procedure bylaw over so many years, obviously there are all sorts of housekeeping updates that come up. These are often minor in nature and may just help in clarity or understanding, making sure there are no contradictions within the text. So likely there will be, many of these minor changes. For the third point on the slide there, the increased clarity and ease of use, I think, is really key to council. As I said, this is a tool for council to use. It's not just a list of rules, but it's something that helps council in its actions at a council meeting, helps them understand how they work together to make these decisions. And then finally, of course, we're always looking at municipal best practices. We're always watching our neighbors throughout York Region and across Ontario on the best practices that are found to keep up with today's modern issues in municipal government. So just quickly, a project background. This was initiated by staff in 2019. Now, unfortunately, this was the end of 2019, and as we all know, just a few months later, the COVID pandemic had broken out, and this procedure bylaw review was a bit more on the back seat at that point. So the COVID-19 pandemic is actually an important one to note in this background, because there were a lot of changes throughout that period, legislative changes that allowed for councils to meet remotely, and it's also really changed the way that councils meet in hybrid formats now that councillors can participate both through remote participation and in person in the traditional format. So then the project really got underway again last year with the meetings that we had informally with council members to solicit that initial feedback. And the final point is really an ongoing one. It's not a single point in this list, but one that we're constantly doing this research and consultation with other municipalities on best practices. So again, we are hoping to make this a bit more of an interactive session tonight. We are looking for feedback from council members. So these are the emerging themes that have come up, largely from the meetings that we had with councillors, but through councillors as well. We've heard from members of the public as well on the issues that they feel are important. So just in terms of format for the presentation, what I'll do is I'll go through these emerging themes, and at the end of each of the sort of big categories, I'm going to pause and I'll turn it back to council to provide that feedback. Again, this is a session where we're hoping to get feedback from council so that we can go forward and draft the procedure bylaw according to the themes that we're seeing. So the first item that I'll start with is probably one of the bigger ones, and certainly one that a lot of councillors have expressed an interest in, and that's the consent agenda. And just so everybody understands what a consent agenda is, very simply, it's when a number of items can be adopted in one motion. So at the beginning of the consent agenda, the chair would ask, are there any items that councillors wish to deal with separately? And councillors would indicate the items that they want to, this is usually called pull, so which items would you like to pull from the list? And then the chair would call for a motion to adopt all of the other items that haven't been pulled in one motion. And then after the main portion of the consent agenda is done, council would go through all of the remaining items one by one in the traditional way. So really the advantage of the consent agenda is the level of efficiency that it gives to council's proceedings. But I think that what I would really emphasize is that efficiency, the purpose of it is to allow council to prioritize the items which they feel are maybe the most complex, the items that they're hearing the most from their constituents on. It's really about prioritizing items on the agenda, allowing council to dive a little deeper into those. So what we wanted to do tonight was give council a couple different options on the consent agenda. You do see a few different variations if you look across even just York Region and across the Greater Toronto Area on how consent is handled. So I'll stress it at the beginning that this is by no means the only two options, and certainly council will be able to find a solution that works best with the culture of this body and the traditions that it works with. But I wanted to give basically two simple categories for council to assist in your decision making in the future. So the first option for the consent agenda that we have listed here is the one which is probably the more common version of the consent agenda. And in that, the consent agenda lists all of the items that have recommendations from staff. So this could be items such as staff reports, memos, correspondence. They would be listed together in the consent agenda together. The only exception would be anytime there are items that don't quite fit with that format. So for example, if there was a report that asked for council's preference on a list of items or that type of report, that wouldn't be able to be adopted on consent because council would need to give further discussion to that item. However, all of the other items would be listed on consent. So in terms of meeting efficiency, this is probably the one that provides the most meeting efficiency because those items that council considers as routine would be adopted in one motion. And then again, council would be able to prioritize their time and focus on those most complex issues afterwards. And just to compare, council currently uses a version of this consent agenda on its council agenda when it adopts all of the recommendations from Committee of the Whole Council in one motion. So council always has the ability to pull out those items for separate discussion. But if there is no further discussion required, then council is able to pass them in one motion. So basically, it would be sort of extending that practice to the Committee of the Whole Council agenda as well, just for comparison's sake. So we did want to give a bit of a visual for this, and basically the example that we've done here is just sort of a mock-up version using the template that you're used to seeing for agendas. And really what we wanted to do is give just a quick sort of snippet of what it might look like. Again, this is just a sample. It's not certainly not anything permanent, but the action items that we've listed at the beginning, those would be the ones that don't quite fit with consent. And the example we have here is a preferred option that council would indicate to staff. On the consent items, you'll see the more familiar setup where we have the items listed by department. Again, this is sort of the format that council is familiar with. And we've done subheadings to show the departments. And then you'll notice that we have the first item, sample item, is a memo, the second is a staff report. So they would all be listed together on the consent agenda. So then just before I sort of turn it back to council, I'll give you the sort of second category, which is a little bit different, where the consent agenda would be a bit more focused on items that are for information only. So this might be memos, reports for information, correspondence, those types of items. And then staff reports would be listed separately from that. So this is one, and again, I do want to express that there are so many different variations on this. If council does see the benefit of separating out items for action, items for information, certainly they could do both on consent. There are lots of different options. So when we did up the sample of this one, it is a little more complex because you now have two categories of items rather than listing them in one consent agenda. It certainly gives you some time savings because for memos and routine items like that, you don't need to deal with them one by one. But obviously, when you put the staff reports in consent as well, you do get a bit more efficiency on dealing with those items as well. So again, sort of the first stage here, we'd like to get council's feedback. So I've given a couple examples on consent. So Madam Mayor, I'll just turn it back to you, and we're certainly happy to start hearing council's feedback on the consent agenda.
Thank you very much, Councillor Johns. Thank you. And then,
Madam Mayor.
and then Councillor Crothers.
Yeah, thanks. This is, I think there was like about 3 items of the 5 that I was strongly advocating for in our one-on-one meetings that we had with the clerks. This was, when I first got elected to council, and knowing how some other municipalities worked on consent agenda items, what I was a bit taken aback by the amount of time we spent on memos that could be that are circulated, obviously, but really from an informational standpoint, and obviously we can ask staff at any point any questions. But then we were taking time and reading them, and I actually think the deputation where folks were speaking tonight about the time allotment, it very much called out like the opportunity to be able to spend time on the things we need to spend time on versus speaking to memos. And the fact is that the ability to always pull items is critical for me. I think that we need to be able to, where possible, tighten up conversations where we don't necessarily need to be focused and it's more informational, and allow for more of a debate and really get into the conversation on the topics. I think it's a great opportunity. So I see this as an opportunity to reallocate time spent in the meeting. That's how I see this.
Thank you. Councillor Crothers?
Thank you. Thank you for this. This is one of the things I've been asking for as well for a long time. To Councillor John's points, it reallocates the time in the meeting, so we do have more time to listen to deputations or to spend on items that are before us for decision making. So whenever I'm looking at the agenda, I'm always going through it and asking myself, what's being asked of us? And I think this helps separate that we want as much information as we can get, because when it comes time to make that decision, we want to make sure we have all the backstory. So giving that to us in a timely manner through memos is important, but at the same time, sometimes something comes up on the agenda and we feel the need to speak to it. So I think it's important to do this as a consent agenda. I just had a question about, if you can go back to option 1, the example, it's the bottom one says, items with recommendations are listed under consent. And so I'm just trying to understand the difference between items requiring action and items with recommendations. I always thought recommendations were action.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, admittedly, that is a little confusing the way I've written it there. So the first items are those items which can't be put on consent because of the way the recommendations are written, maybe is how I should have explained it. So because that first recommendation is council would indicate, maybe in a list of 4 options, they would pick one out. That type of item would be set aside from consent because council can't pass that on consent. They do need to indicate one. So in some agendas, you might see this listed as items requiring further discussion and then consent after that. So then the consent category would be sort of everything else other than those exception ones.
Okay, I think then my first thoughts on this is I like option number 2, because I think anything that we are making a recommendation on or staff are asking for a recommendation, I think the public deserves to hear us deliberate on it. If it's very straightforward and no one has any comments, that's fine, but I don't think that we should have to pull those ones all the time. I think if there is some sort of recommendation attached to it, it should be on the council regular agenda, not the consent agenda. I also think that this can progress over time. I don't think we need to go all the way to putting absolutely everything on the consent agenda possible. I think that we can start with some of the more routine things and then find out other things that we can add. But I think it's a good opportunity for staff to give us more memos on things that we need to be up to speed on, knowing that when we get that memo, it's not going to be an hour-long discussion at the table. It's just going to be information that's there for us to read through and follow up if we have any questions. So thank you for this.
Councillor Roy DeClemente.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you, for me, the time and effort that staff put into their staff reports is important, and whether they're making 1 recommendation or 3, I still think that we have an obligation to consider that. I love the idea of having, the information memos that don't have a recommendation to be adopted. I think those are really important. The routine matters should be part of our consent. Our library board actually works with a consent agenda, and it's usually reports from other bodies, copies of presentations. In fact, it's a lot of the stuff that normally comes to us through correspondence. It goes into the consent agenda because it's information that we want the board to be aware of, but it doesn't require the board to deliberate or make decisions on. And I think that's an important distinction. I would welcome, I call it a modified, I guess, option 1, which is to take those staff reports that people have worked really hard on and put that into our, that's part of the reason why we have the CWC, which is to create that space to allow for discussion and debate, and then for that to be ratified 2 weeks later, once we've had an opportunity to kind of sit with that information as well. So I think that's, for me, that's mindful decision-making and it's informed decision-making. Thank you.
Councillor Leahy, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, through you, Madam Mayor. I see things differently. I believe that consent agendas are a bad idea. We rely on the council to be thorough, and the devil is in the details. One of the councillors has just mentioned that the staff prepares very thorough reports, but there have been multiple occasions where members of council have voted against the recommendations of staff reports. And so I believe that everything deserves very thorough consideration by all members of council. We meet twice a month, and why can't we be thorough on all of town business? And my main concern is that we risk, for the sake of efficiency, that there may become some complacency in the process.
Thank you. Any other? Councillor Foster, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I believe we need the consent agenda. There are many, many topics there that I think can certainly speed up our meetings if we do things, not separately all the way through. The only other thing that I do wonder about sometimes is that I wonder if there's a possibility that we could find out earlier than at the meeting when certain topics are going to be pulled. I have found myself a couple of times sitting here, your head going 100 miles an hour thinking, why does somebody want to pull this one? It generally comes out very quickly, but I just wonder if there's any way to have advance notice or if that even would work. I'm not sure 100% where I'm going with this one. I welcome some thought process from the rest of the people at the table.
Councillor Crone? Go ahead,
Thank you,
please.
Madam Mayor, through you to Andrew. I was just curious, how many other councils in York Region use consent agendas? Because I'll admit, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. I hear both sides and I struggle. And maybe there's a gradual approach we take, but anyway, I'm just curious about how many other councils use this.
Sure. Through you, Madam Mayor, sorry, I don't have the exact number in front of me here. I would say that it is quite common in the region, but I would also express, and I think that's how I started, was that each one is a little different. And I think each council finds the consent agenda that fits their practices best. So that's why I tried to separate it into sort of two categories for council to examine, because I think you do find the one that fits your practices best and the culture that goes with the council.
Okay. Madam Mayor, through you. Was there a particular council that struck you as being very effective, efficient, and how they conducted themselves? That might not be a fair question, but I'll ask it anyways.
Through you, Madam Mayor, it might sort of illustrate where I've come from and might sort of illustrate a potential bias there. So I wouldn't indicate one that works more effectively than others, because again, it sort of becomes ingrained in the system that council uses in their meetings. So I think it sort of, it becomes part of the way council makes its decisions. And I think, I'm thinking it's almost the chicken and egg kind of situation where does council create the consent agenda and then that changes their behavior, or does their behavior adjust over time and they adopt the consent agenda to go with that? So it is difficult for me to say, to compare apples and oranges, I suppose. So, yeah.
All right. So, Madam Mayor, let the record show that the clerk refused to take the bait. I think, what we put in our procedural bylaw is important, but I also think amongst us, we need to be respectful of each other's times. If a colleague raises a question that I was thinking of, which happens often, I don't need to ask it again. And so I think we can find ways for us to be efficient in how we operate. And we don't have to comment on every darn report that's out there, because some things are just very matter of fact. All right, thank you. I appreciate the exchange. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Back to you.
Thank you. Councillor Carruthers, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I've had a lot of experience working with consent agendas on a number of boards that I've been on, and it is a very good process, and I think there is some misunderstanding if you haven't worked with them before. First of all, it's not about saving time or shortening the meetings. It's about spending your time on the items where there's a decision to be made. So I think there was a comment down the other end of the table about voting against a staff report. Well, that wouldn't be in a consent agenda item if there was a decision to be made, right? So we're not talking about putting those types of things into consent agenda. To me, it means that staff can give us more information that we can read on our own time, and then have more time to deliberate on the things that we're being asked to make a decision, which are the things that are affecting our residents and that our residents want to know about. So it gives us more time to do that. So that's why I think that this is a great idea, and the most efficient boards that I've worked on have always used a consent agenda. Now, to Councillor Foster's question about pulling things, it was something that came to my mind as well, is that we tend to get the agenda a little bit late, especially if you happen to go away for the weekend and that's your time that you should be reading your agenda. It gets very difficult to have the time to ask questions of staff or to pull an item, to let your colleagues know that you're pulling an item. And something that I've talked with the clerk about is one board I was on used an agenda building program that the members of the board could get the reports as they were ready. So rather than waiting till all the reports are ready and we get a 400-page agenda, the agenda is populated into your program, and so you can read them ahead of time. So some of these memos, we might get on the Monday, and we might have questions about them, or be able to let people know that we're pulling them. So I think that there's a different way of doing the agenda so that we have more time to look at it and know which items we want to be pulled. Sometimes it's just a question, like I want to talk to my colleagues about it. Like, are you reading this memo the way I'm reading it? Does this look like this? And, oh, no, it's okay, it's this way, or you talk to staff, right? So us having more time with the agenda before the meeting would also be very well received. Thank you.
Councillor Lahey, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. Through you, Madam Mayor. I do believe that a change in the style of agenda will potentially change behavior in a negative way. Our goal is not to see how fast we can get through the agenda with silencing opportunities for a fulsome discussion from members of council who have a divergence of opinion on issues. And so that bottom line for me is that we have 2 council meetings a month, and I believe that the taxpayers rely on councillors to be thorough and to be transparent and to have every opportunity to discuss all of the details, and the devil is in the detail. Thank you.
Councillor Roy DeClemente, go ahead, please.
I just did thank you, Madam Mayor. I just did a quick search on our website, and by my calculation, there have been 74 bylaws that this council has passed, simply addressing part lot control. So that's when a townhouse is being built and they are required to create a bylaw that delineates the individual units in that townhouse. Not once in any of those bylaws have we had any kind of truly fulsome discussion about whether or not we should pass a part lot control bylaw. And so those are the sorts of items that I would expect to see in a consent agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Johns, go ahead, please.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. And I just want to say this because I'm in support of a consent agenda based on comments that were made at this table here, that does not mean that my thought process would not be thorough, nor would it be transparent to the public. And I actually don't like the tone of saying because I am going to vote one way that I have an opinion that I am not thorough or transparent. I actually think that that's the whole point of having the consent agenda, is that we can have more time and discussion on the things that we want to debate. And that's what I said from the very beginning. And if you want to speak to it, you can pull the item. So I just wanted to go on the record that comments about not being thorough, not being transparent, if I want to choose to support this motion, I just find that wholly unwelcoming to a debate that is supposed to be one that is breeding increased transparency, not putting each other down. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Councillor Crothers, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I just want to back up what Councillor Johns is saying. To pose this as silencing debate is mischaracterizing what this is. To me, this means that we can be more thorough, that rather than debating things that we have no say on, or things that are so automatic, like part lot control bylaws, we're going to be able to spend more time on the items that are truly in need of debate and deliberation by this council. And to characterize it as not being thorough, when we're talking about getting more information, having more time to debate the important issues, I think is really mischaracterizing it. And nothing is more transparent than having everything in that agenda and being able to pull anything you want, the public being able to see everything that's in the agenda. To me, that is very, very transparent, and I think it's misinformed to characterize it otherwise.
Thank you. Comments? Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. So we'll move on to the next theme. So this one is a little broader, and we've just labeled it as public engagement to be a sort of broader category to collect a number of items on the procedure bylaw. So The categories, sorry, I should say the examples that we've listed on this slide, this is obviously by no means complete. We just wanted to give some examples of all the different ways that public engagement occurs. So obviously, some of the corporate communications through social media, newsletters, other more traditional communications such as advertisements, those in-person type events such as public information centers, other town events. Those are a lot of the ways that the town communicates with the public. The fourth point on there is the the elected representatives who communicate directly with their constituents, not only receiving the feedback from their constituents, but also sharing that information with them as well. So I wanted to start with this slide just to show those last 2 points are really where we get down to the procedure bylaw, how it impacts public engagement. Because as I started the presentation, the procedure bylaw governs the meetings part of council and the proceedings of meetings. So the impact of public engagement specifically is on the correspondence to council and deputation. So I'll just advance now to, we have deputations listed first. And again, just in terms of format, this one I'll just take a few more pauses throughout just to give council a chance to discuss some of the options as we go through them, just for simplicity. So the first item we have listed here is the deputation timelines. So they are currently noon on Friday, the Friday before the meeting. So this is if somebody wants to do a deputation on a published agenda item. So I will just stress as well as we go through this is meant as a feedback session. At this point, we're not really giving recommendations to staff right now. We're giving some options for council to consider. And there will be multiple stages where council will be seeing amendments to the draft and then making a final decision in the future. So the options that we have listed here right now, I think are a fairly simple, compromise solution version where we could move the deputation request timeline up to noon on the Monday. So that does give the weekend to residents to review the agendas. So the advantage of this would be that clerk staff still have time to receive those deputation requests, revise the agendas on the Monday afternoon, submit them back to council. And it's certainly important that council is able to see those revised agendas before the meeting day to be able to review the additions of new deputations, if there's any material that goes with that. So we feel that this timeline would allow for more time for residents to sign up, but then also council still has that option to see what's coming before the meeting. I think it's also important to, in case there's anything that staff want to prepare for a deputation as well, that they also be informed of a new request coming in. So it does allow for that time. So again, Madam Mayor, I can just turn it back if council wants to discuss this one in particular, and then we can keep moving.
Councillor Johns, go ahead, please.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to say the slide back about about where people are finding their information. I think that the survey that we're conducting right now is important because with the loss of our community newspapers, we really do need to drill down and find kind of where is the majority of people receiving their information. And then I would love to see that big focus put on where the majority of people are going and have the rest of them serve as kind of an echo chamber to make sure that we're receiving it. And obviously there's the statutory that needs to happen, but I think kind of focusing on one single source once we find out what that is and then having that echo chamber come out. And I mean, for the most part, I think we might be doing that already. But the reality is that we could multiply this 100-fold and we would still be receiving comments from folks that said that I didn't receive this. And then we need to go one-on-one and find out how they are receiving their information. So I just wanted to comment on that from the public engagement side, because that was something that I was vocal on as well before during this process. And then on the second slide, I think that that's great to add more time for the deputation. Like sometimes even when we get our agenda, again, as Councillor Carruthers said, like spending the time on a weekend on like a 400-page agenda, how do we expect residents to be able to sink their teeth into it, then reflect on it, and then come to the decision that, yes, I would like to do a deputation on it. I think as much time as we can allow from an operational standpoint on this. I'd like if it changed to Monday at 2 o'clock. Like every hour is better. And I think that I think this really does recognize the residents in this process. Thank you.
Councillor Carruthers, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I think I would agree with the later limit. If it's 2 o'clock, often what we're getting from the deputants doesn't take long to go through. They're going to present it to us anyways. It's not a decision-making item. I want to spend a lot of time on staff reports that we have to make a decision on and make sure that we have follow-up questions. But just quickly going through deputation, I think most of the deputants would rather have more time to prepare their deputation and have us spend less time with it before the meeting. So I would agree with that even 2 o'clock on the Monday. And then as far as the length of time, 8 out of 10 York Region municipalities have a 5-minute limit. Makes me think, well, then 5 minutes is where it should be. And then I think about how many deputations we have and how many of them go over the 5 minutes, and we're polite about it and we let them go over. And then a few people who are rule followers make sure they stick to the 5 minutes, and that seems unfair. So I think expanding it to 8 minutes, I don't think is going to cut into substantially into our council meetings. And if we suddenly have 10 deputations at every single meeting, speaking for the full 8 minutes, then we can revisit it then. But until then, I think allowing 8 minutes, but having a hard cutoff, the mic gets cut at 8 minutes, so that the people who are more extroverted and don't mind speaking over the limit get more time than the people who are rule followers, right? So I would say 8 minutes with a hard cutoff.
Councillor Foster, go ahead, please.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Again, I agree with my colleagues that timeline to the Monday, I believe, needs to be changed for sure. The only other thing that I'm thinking about to kind of go along with Councillor Johns here, we talk about the communications piece. I say this all the time. I like to keep things simple. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. I think we're doing everything we can do. Maybe we're not doing it the best. But what other municipalities out there are doing something different? And is it better? Is there some simple idea there we can follow along? Like I would love to have somebody say, in the town of Aurora, they do this, this, and this. Well, why aren't we doing that too?
Okay, Madam Mayor, I can just continue on. The next one is also on deputations. This one is a little more open-ended. I've included a few items in here. The current procedure bylaw does define both deputations and presentations, and it also gives a 5-minute limit for deputations. So there are some options for council, of course, here. Again, I've left this one a little more open-ended. Certainly could expand or clarify the definitions of deputations, presentations. Certainly an option that council's already sort of started discussing is the 5-minute limit, where certainly the most common one in York Region is 5 minutes, but up to council to give their ultimate sign-off on the procedure bylaw on how they feel that time limit fits with the procedure bylaw. And then I think maybe just one more point on the current procedure bylaw for presentations. They are defined, but they don't really have a time limit defined in the procedure bylaw. So maybe one more thing for council to consider is should a presentation be time limited as well as a deputation? So, Madam Mayor, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. Councillor, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I should have jumped in earlier. The piece on public engagement, through you, Madam Mayor, I think if there's one thing we get right on this whole thing, it's that. And I remember before I was elected, sitting in those seats, and because I was here for a zoning bylaw review that I didn't know anything about, but a neighbor had told me about it, and I remember chirping to Councillor Roy T. Clemente about it afterwards, and we're so hurt by the loss of a print newspaper now. You know, back years ago, that was the only source of information people had, and everyone read it. But now people consume their information in so many different ways, whether it's, you know, thank God we still have the bulletin, but it only comes out monthly. So that's a challenge for you in the clerk's department to get things out in advance. You know, we have social media. You know, there's the emails, there's everything. You know, it's tougher. And, you know, from my own marketing background, I remember we had a saying, you know, just once you think you've communicated something enough, you keep communicating it because you haven't gotten through. So that's tough, and I have no silver bullet for this one. It's tough, and we just have to keep doing best we can to improve. I think with respect to the deputations, if we can be as generous as possible on the timeline of letting people sign up, I think there's no harm in that. The time limit, I think when I had my time in the chair, I was generous in giving people their extra beyond 5 minutes. I think there's no reason why, unless we've got a lineup out the door of people that want to speak, I think we need to be generous with that as well. Anyway, thank you, Madam Mayor. Those are my comments.
Thank you. Councillor Roy DeClemente and Councillor Hay.
Thank you. For me, and I think staff have heard this from me on a fairly regular basis, and that's the distinction between a deputation and a presentation. And we've had, we'll call them stakeholders, who've come and made presentations, and I'm like, how did this get to be a 20-minute presentation when this is technically a deputation? And I think we, whether it's in our procedural bylaw or whether it's in our operating guidelines, we need to be much more mindful and more cautious about what we're allowing to be a presentation and what is a deputation. And if we're going to be expanding or extending the period for a deputation, then perhaps those presentations can be shortened. And if council wants to hear more, then we can amend accordingly. But I'd like to see the way that we operate around those two different kinds of speeches, if you will, locked down a little bit better than we have in the past. Thank you.
Councillor Leahy, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, through you, Madam Chair. Well, first I'd like to commend the town because currently they are having a encouraging participation in a survey by having a gift card contest. So they are doing their very best to be creative in how they reach out to the public. But time and time again, there is a lack of awareness amongst residents of the opportunity that they have in the democratic process to make a deputation. And they don't know what a deputation is or the process and how to approach the clerks, etc. So there's a key to not only just expanding and clarifying the definitions, but from a more foundational point of view, educating the public as to the opportunities to make a deputation and how to do that. So when residents approach me and they have a particular issue, I always encourage them. I say, you know, it's best to, if you can, come before council in person, share your concerns and your questions, and that's the way we like to operate as well, face-to-face with residents. But also, I think that the benefits of doing that from a resident's point of view, having them engage that way, is most beneficial to the town. So I would encourage an education piece once the definitions are clarified that raises awareness for all of the residents of East Gwillimbury. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. So we'll just move on to that second category under public engagement, which is correspondence. So currently the practice is that all correspondence is received at the council meeting rather than a committee. And then we also do have that general correspondence package, which is sent out weekly. And those are the more general items, often resolutions from other municipalities and those types of items. So some options for council to consider, especially we've discussed the consent agenda earlier in the presentation, and even more generally, aside from the consent agenda, correspondence might be more, maybe more consistent, labeled as a committee item rather than a council item. We thought one more simple solution would be if somebody writes in about a specific agenda item, similar to the way that they would do a deputation, but in a written form, it might be helpful to actually list that correspondence directly with the item. And so council receives that correspondence at the same time. I think sometimes we've seen correspondence about a specific item that sort of comes out of order and gets received after the item is dealt with. So I think that would be a simple solution to make sure that those concerns are dealt with the item's deliberations. Certainly for the information package, I think it's working well, and we didn't really hear anything from council, but I put it there as an option just in case. There's always room to expand information that gets added to that package if council has ideas, but I think that one is working well. So again, I can just pause here if there's any specific comments from council on the correspondence even more generally than this.
Councillor Crothers, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I try to read the weekly correspondence, but like you said, a lot of it is just copies of resolutions from other municipalities. But every now and again, there's something in there that we really need to talk about. So I'm wondering if staff can be putting more correspondence that they feel is necessary for us to see on the agendas, because I think there's room for more, especially if we have a consent agenda. You can just pop it into the consent agenda, and that way sometimes things get missed when you've got a big information package and most of it is nothing, to try and find that one thing in there that you actually need to pay attention to. So if staff can put more on our consent agenda, I think that would be welcome. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions?
Okay. So we'll move on to the next category, and this is another one that we heard in a lot of the consultations we did with council on notice of motion. Just at the beginning of the slide there, I've listed the definition as it is in the procedure bylaw right now, and I think it is a bit wordy and maybe not that clear. And so I think what we heard from councillors is that the notice of motion process isn't really frequently used. And I think it is fair to say that it is a little cumbersome in the way that it works right now, that councillors provide that written notice ahead of the committee agenda. They do also require a mover and a seconder at the notice stage, which I think is actually a little unusual for the notice of motion process. So one of the options that we've looked at, this is something that's popping up in some of the other York Region municipalities, is it seems a little simpler to label it member motions. Rather than having those two separate categories of notice of motion and motion. So basically, one category would deal with both the notice and the motion. Of course, it is definitely ideal if councillors can provide that notice ahead of time so that the notice is listed right on the agenda in writing so that members have the chance to think about it beforehand and prepare. But one specific one we wanted to sort of get council's feedback on would be a second option to give notice verbally at a committee meeting during that member motion section. So we thought that, I think really what we heard from council is finding practices that, or I should say, procedures that align with the practices that are responsive to council's deliberations and decision-making. And I think we often see times when, through discussion on other items, members might have ideas that don't quite fit with the item they're discussing. And I think clearly sometimes it's not quite clear how that item should be dealt with. So we thought that this might be an option for council. If something comes up during discussion or even something more urgent comes up, that if they provide that notice verbally during the member motion section, for example, if they hold it down from a different, maybe a staff report they're discussing, and then give that notice verbally at the member motion section, that would count towards their notice, and they'd be able to bring their full motion at the following meeting. Of course, we ask that they provide us with the written notice afterwards so that we have that for our records. But again, we're looking for processes that would help council during its meetings and streamline things a little bit more. So I thought this might be an interesting option to, as I said, streamline. And then the other tool that we'd be looking to provide council, again, to standardize things a bit, provide a form or a template that members can use to type up their notice, type up their motion. They'll all look the same. They'll all have the same format. And again, I think a simple solution to help council, with this member motion process. So I have just listed a few what I think are advantages to this slightly revised process. And the first one would be coming with the actual revision, where we would have a clear definition of what needs to be under member motions, because I think that's one of the others that we've heard from members, is they're not quite sure sometimes what level something needs to be at to get to that motion stage or a notice of motion. It does still provide in this revised process the ability to have that advance notice for not only council members who will be deliberating, but members of the public to know what's coming up, staff members to prepare for that item if there's research they want to do ahead of time. The other important one, and this is of course one of the reasons why notice is so important, is that members do also need the chance to consider if they might have a conflict with an item. So that is why we accentuate the need for the notice in some way. And then the other one, I think we wanted to link this back in a way to the public engagement section that we talked about before, because I think by enabling council with a simpler motion process, there might be a way for councillors to advocate directly for their residents on their behalf. If they're hearing concerns from the community, that there's something that they can do. Certainly there is the deputation, the correspondence options, but if members felt that they were able to sort of do that directly on their behalf, I think member motions is one that you will commonly see in other municipalities, councillors sort of writing those motions and bringing them to council's attention for deliberation. So again, really happy to hear the feedback on council, from council on this one. So Madam Mayor, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much. Are there comments at this point? Councillor Johns, go ahead, please.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to get clarity, like on this one slide back, when you're saying that if a member brings verbally, that would count, so to speak, is the kind of the spirit and the intent of what you were trying to communicate to us, and then they would provide a meeting afterwards. I just want to reaffirm the fact that it does have to be in writing afterwards, so then we can, okay. Yeah. So that is, the spirit is that you would let people know that this is what I'm wanting to do, I'll put it in writing. That allows us time to be able to see what this actually is and then be able to prepare ourselves for it for the next meeting.
Through you, Madam Mayor, certainly we would ask for the notice itself in writing, just so we have the text of that. But then, of course, the motion itself, whether you give notice in writing or verbally, would be listed on the next agenda in writing. That one would certainly be required because council needs to see the text of the motion.
Councillor Roy Clemente.
Thank you. For me, this one's a bit of a complicated one, and it comes up when members of council have a good idea that doesn't fit in with the agenda. We're dealing with one thing, and then, but I also want to talk about this, and we stifle that because it doesn't fit with our procedure. And yet the notice of motion and having to have advance also stifles that creativity of, that brainstorming that we get from each other when we're debating an issue. I've often felt that we don't use other business enough under our agenda. And so if something comes up during our meeting, we say, okay, you know what? That's a great idea. I understand that you want to deal with that. Let's deal with that at the end of the meeting under other business. And then that member can, they don't need a seconder because we're at committee of the whole, can say, I'd like to bring this forward. And then perhaps it becomes part of the council agenda later. But it's brought up at CWC where it doesn't require someone to second it. It's part of that committee work that we do, and we throw it either under, I see it as other business, not necessarily member motions or things like that, because it's not always something that it's a motion. Sometimes it's just, hey, we need to deal with transit, but we're talking about the Youth Advisory Committee. We want to talk about transit. We'd like staff to come back to us with some information about this before we even have a motion or a recommendation. So I feel like the other business area of our agenda could be better used, and especially at the committee level. Thanks.
Councillor Carruthers, go ahead, please.
Thank you. This one concerns me, and I've put forward my own notices of motion. It concerns me of it being misused. So I would like, if we were going to do something with this, that we also have some training for council on other ways to bring forward their ideas, other ways to get things done. I often find when I have a question or concern, going straight to staff and ask them, are you going to be writing a report on this? Like, you know, is there something coming forward on this? Whatever happened with X, Y, Z? And having it come from staff up rather than from individuals around the table, derailing staff's plans. So, you know, we have our council's strategic document, and from that we get our business plan, which we have a lot of input into, and then from that staff are tasked with how do you make everything in the business plan actually happen over the course of the year. And now we're going to add something in where any member of council can derail that plan at any point in time. And I think that we just have to be careful with that. Like I said, I've used notice of motion. I think that it's something that should be available to us, but I think we just want to be careful that at the end of the meeting, we don't have 6 different directions to staff on 6 different items that they weren't planning on dealing with this month. So I think we just want to be careful with that. And as far as bringing it up at the same meeting, I think we need to be very careful of people being able to declare conflict, having an understanding of what the item is, and I think that's why notice of motion is a standard that you let people know ahead of time what's going to be discussed. There's also, you know, Robert's rules talks about protecting those who aren't here. So if someone is ill, and if I was ill and I couldn't be here, and then I suddenly found out someone brought up something about keeping the lagoons open forever, well, I would have crawled here from my sick bed to be here, right? So I think I want to avoid bringing things up on the fly for discussion, because it doesn't protect the people who are absent due to illness or whatever.
Councillor Hay, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. First, I would like to say that I agree with the comments made by Councillor Roy DeClemente in terms of using other business category in a more productive way, because I have experienced this as a councillor where during the course of the discussion and debate on council, ideas have come up and input that I would like to share that I feel expands the conversation or would potentially be something positive in the future for council to deliberate, gets overlooked or is labeled as being inappropriate at that time because it wasn't put in advance a notice of motion. So that's my one comment on that. And it's a bit ironic that we were discussing about efficiency before, for the sake of efficiency, having consent agendas, but we don't want to be efficient in terms of moving the business of the town forward with the delays that are created going through the processes of the notice of motion. So there's pros and cons to both aspects. But finally, I would like to ask the clerk, through you, Madam Mayor, specifically the Roberts rules were referred to. And my understanding through the town clerk in discussions previously to this meeting is that the Roberts rules do not apply to our, in our case, in the municipality of East Gwillimbury, Roberts rules do not apply. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Mayor, our procedure bylaw right now doesn't refer to any external, it's often referred to as an aid, procedural documents such as Robert's rules. So directly, no. However, Robert's rules and other ones are commonly referred to just in general sort of procedural situations.
So just a follow-up, Madam Mayor, through you, Madam Mayor. So Robert's rules do not apply to our procedures here on Town Council. Is that correct? Our procedural bylaws are paramount, and we do not operate according to Robert's rules. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that's correct.
Thank you very much for that clarification.
Councillor Johns, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Mayor. Just as we're, obviously, this meeting is for discussion and information gathering and comments and feedback. Respectfully, I just want to go on the record regarding the discussion surrounding the other business portion. I agree that you could say that other business is underutilized. Councillor Roy DiClemente made that comment. And there was also the comment about how do we use it was also another comment. Like, if we can't use it, then why is it there? Like, the call out that it's underutilized, I don't know why it's sitting on the discussion. Like, there's another upcoming in your presentation. Like, when I came on board, again, a year and a half ago, I was like, why isn't there the approval of the agenda? Because do we all agree that this is what we're talking about, was the spirit of what I was getting into my head? And then, so when I saw the other business there, I was like, okay, so what if something was going to happen in front of my house and I'm prepared to talk about it? Or what if, anyway, we can go through those scenarios and everybody gets the spirit of what I'm talking about. But where the call out was that it's underutilized as under business, my comment would be, well, just because it's underutilized doesn't mean we need to use it. I would maybe call out, why is it even there? Because I feel we should be approving our agenda and everybody agreeing this is what we're talking about today, so that we can have a fulsome debate about it. So that's my comment on the other side.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. We'll just continue on, and very timely, we have the approval of the agenda next.
Sorry, I had my hand.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry, okay.
that's okay.
I missed that one out of the corner of my eye. Go ahead.
I think we need to be careful with comments like, "Oh, now we don't want to be efficient." Don't think there's anyone here who doesn't want to be efficient. What we're trying to do is trying to protect the integrity of the process so that something that, you know, is off the cuff, a good idea, has the proper deliberation that it deserves. And I apologize for saying Roberts. I should have said meeting norms, because there's Bernot's and there's Martha's and there's a whole bunch of other ones. So it's not about just a specific meeting set of rules. It's about standards in how to make, hundreds of years of standards around how to make meetings efficient, and it's a core principle of meetings such as this, and that's what I meant, not Roberts in particular.
Councillor Roy DiClemente, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The other business piece, we used to actually, at CWC, at the end of each of our areas, I think we still sort of do it as a practice. We ask, is there anything else? Is there anyone want to raise something here? That provides for the longer that council wants the agenda to be published earlier. So we want it on Wednesday, we want it on Tuesday, we want it, then the lead time between when the agenda is published and when we actually meet, the longer that period of time goes, the more possibility there is for other stuff to come up. And we need to provide a space on the agenda, and whether it's under each individual department or whether it's under other business, for our staff to bring verbal updates to us. Hey, guess what? We just got a grant awarded to us. It's not in the prepared agenda, but I felt it was timely to let you know. Those sorts of things are really important, particularly at the CWC level, where we're not ratifying it. It's not stamped at no erases. It's literally the business of our debating and our process. When it comes to council, that's when we're stamping it no erases, and absolutely we need to have an ironclad agenda so that we know what we're coming, because there isn't any going back from there. But at the CWC level, we're sitting in committee and we're working as a body. Thanks.
Councillor Johns, go ahead, please.
So, just to rebut Councillor Roy DiClemente's, so thank you for the acknowledgement on the council piece. I think that's, when you're saying that we're sitting there in committee, yeah, totally agree. And if staff want to bring forward a verbal update, but I think that it's also not fair to residents if we go into a discussion like, we are working, like, it was interesting, Mr. Gamble's comment about council and residents, really spirit of committee and residents to be able to engage in that discussion of what we're talking about. That's all I'm saying on the set agenda. I think a verbal update, to your point, yeah, wholly agree if there's a verbal update. But again, and it goes back to, I think, to Councillor Carruthers' comment too about the education piece on how we're using it. So verbal updates, yeah, but if we start getting into a discussion about something, well then, conflict aside, what about residents aside that want to be a part of the discussion? So that's where I'm coming from.
Okay, so the last couple slides are much more in the realm of housekeeping updates. Approval of the agenda has already sort of been raised already, so as was mentioned, there isn't actually a section on the agendas right now for approval of the agenda, or you might commonly see it as well, additions and corrections, that type of category. So certainly what we heard from a number of councillors was that this would be a helpful addition, just to set at the beginning, have a procedural motion to approve the agenda and then move forward. Some of the things that often come up, or maybe not often, but on occasion would come up, would be those types of last-minute additions from staff. Maybe there's a correction to an item, something like that, and that's another good place for that to happen at approval of the agenda, just so council is sort of aware of any revisions that were made before they move on to the rest of it. So, Madam Mayor, this is a shorter one. I'm happy to just pass it back if there's any further comments from council.
Comments? Questions? Go ahead,
I'm
please.
sorry, Madam Mayor. I just want to go on the record because it was the one-on-one meetings I brought this up. I just like the spirit of, do we all agree that this is what we're talking about today? I brought this up in the one-on-one meetings, and I just wanted to share that I think it's important to set the table at the dais to say this is everything we're talking about today. So anyway, thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you.
Okay, and the final option here, and this one has already come up in conversation as well, and I've left this one a little open-ended as well. If there's any other sort of housekeeping items, simple ones that council has on their minds, we can certainly receive those as well. So some of the ones that we heard from councillors, the first one, again, quite procedural, just about the question of if council is approving the recommendations of a staff report, then do they need to receive it as well, because that first clause is to receive. So that might be one that is a fairly simple change if it's redundant to receive and also act on something. And then the second one for other business, just listed a couple simple options there for council, and I think we've already sort of started that discussion, is if other business is to be used, it probably needs a clear definition of exactly what type of items would fall under other business. And again, I think this has come up, is if it isn't used at all, then is it necessary to keep it on the agenda? So for these ones, and if there's any other housekeeping, I'm happy to take those now. So, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Lahey, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. So is this the right spot to be asking a general question? Could it be considered other business if I ask a general question in this spot? Is it okay? Is this the appropriate spot?
Please go ahead.
Okay.
Yep.
I have a general question because I had my one-on-one with the town solicitor and town clerk. It was back in January of 2023. And a lot has transpired since then, especially with regard to strong mayoral powers and seeking clarification on all the implications of that. So will the procedural bylaws include clarification or additions specifically regarding the strong mayoral powers?
Okay. Sorry, just have a disruption here. So for the strong mayor powers, so that's one of the things that's currently being reviewed by staff. It might be more appropriate for me to pass it to the town solicitor, but certainly we're reviewing the other procedural bylaws across the region and the Greater Toronto municipalities that have those strong mayor powers and how exactly they fit with the procedure bylaw, since strong mayor powers are exercised not in meetings but outside of them. So I can pass that to the solicitor if there's anything further, or otherwise.
I can paraphrase through you, Madam Mayor, with the original question while you were having the other conversation. So will the updated procedural bylaws include clarification and additions specifically outlining the strong mayoral powers and how they affect the procedural bylaws?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it's not definitive yet, Councillor Leahy, whether it will or it won't. My assessment at this point is it probably will include something in terms of strong mayors, but I'd like to remain, less than definitive tonight, but I think they will. It will.
And if I may, Madam Mayor, one more general question, Madam Mayor, if I may, through you to our town clerk. Will there be any specific procedural bylaws around the revision and updating and creation of procedural bylaws? So, for example, they were last done in 2009, and because there's always ongoing changes, will we have built into the new procedural bylaws some sort of a time frame that we update it more regularly so that we don't go for such a long stretch? Should it be updated every 2 years or on an as-needed basis? Or it just seems like we have a lot of catching up to do. I mean, we're in a good situation, but there is definitely room for improvement to our procedural bylaws. So is there any opportunity to include a timeline that we regularly update our bylaws, procedural bylaws?
Through you, Madam Mayor, you've actually sort of anticipated one of my further slides, Councillor, so we will get to that, but certainly I'm happy to answer it now, which is that I think will be probably more part of the staff report that we bring back on the next steps for further reviews. But I think certainly how I see it is that it would be appropriate for council to set a basic time frame they'd like to review the procedural bylaw on a regular basis. I think certainly the one that I would be familiar with would be sort of in conjunction with new terms of council, so that members will be able to not only reflect on their experiences, but also on those of the new councillors when they're elected. But that's certainly something that council can direct staff on when we come back to that stage of the process, on how often they would like to see a procedure bylaw have that sort of regular review that might deal with especially a lot of these housekeeping items that I'm mentioning. Okay.
I'm not seeing any other comments.
Okay,
at
so
this time.
thank you, Madam Mayor. I can just wrap up then. So for next steps, as I started the presentation by saying, we really do see this as sort of the introductory stage with council on getting this feedback from you that we can then draft that first version of the procedure bylaw and report back to council with that. We do see this as a multi-stage approach where we wouldn't present you with the final version and of course sort of expect it to be passed right away. We'd certainly like council some time to reflect on the proposed amendments, and we'd like to continue soliciting that feedback before we present a final version of the bylaw to council. After that stage, we would have the implementation stage where we would certainly look to some procedural training for council to get used to those new changes, and of course that sort of midterm type of refresher training, and certainly bringing staff into that as well. And as we just mentioned, the sort of final steps would be those ongoing ones, which be continuous monitoring of any legislative changes, best practices that come up, and then setting perhaps a timeline for a regular review of the procedure bylaw going forward. So, Madam Mayor, members of council, that's the conclusion of my presentation. I'm happy to answer any further questions if there's any, or any feedback that didn't quite fit into those categories. And thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. I think there were a lot of questions that people had been hanging on to for quite some time with the hopes of having it answered at a proper meeting. And I think tonight was the perfect time to deal with several of those tough questions that all of us have from time to time. Thank you. Could I have a mover and a seconder to adjourn, please, Councillor Foster? Oh, sorry, sorry.
No, but we need a mover for the.
We need a mover,
We've
seconder to receive.
received. Thank you, thank you. Councillor Crothers, Councillor Johns, thank you. All in favor? And that's carried. We'll recess for 10 minutes. 10 minutes at this time?
Yep.
Thank you. Well, we've kind of cleared our chamber tonight. We'll turn it over to staff at this time. Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair, we're pleased to present a council public production review this evening. The intent of this presentation is to provide sort of a historic overview of how we've broadcast our council meetings, along with some recommended next steps. And with us this evening is our Director of IT, Scott McNeil, who is going to take you through the presentation.
Welcome. Good to have you with us today.
At this workshop? I think it's on, thank you. Technology is a challenge for me, Councillor. I did test it before I came up here, but I forgot to turn it on, so maybe I need to adjust my protocol. Part of our conversation today. So pleased to talk to you again, give us a bit of an overview, an update to some, maybe an update to some of the councillors that have joined us in the last couple of years. Update the page 2, slide 2, please, Andrew. Thank you. So the purpose of today's presentation is to provide an update, historic view of some of the changes we've made to enhance the public view of the audio-video portion of the council meeting. And we have 3 intervals here: the pre-COVID activities, the COVID production, some of the things we did to enable the new thing called COVID that is old news now, but something we did, and that was well done by staff. And then the current state, how we produce the events today, and some of the protocol changes that were blended in across those three timelines. Next slide, please. I love Venn diagrams. It's a way to communicate business architecture, ideas, relationships, and factors that influence council production. I think I should have a fourth one here, is your preferences, but your preferences are through the protocols. So basically legislative requirements are legislative requirements. Some of them involve audio-video productions, but more so it's about council meeting protocols, your preferences that I think come to staff as protocols. And in my world, IT, we call them requirements, but in this case, it's a protocol, same thing. And those legislative requirements and protocols influence the technology solutions. And that's what the components of what the production that we can produce today. And all three of those elements really can influence the quality of the production. And over the last few years, I'm happy to say that we have twice as many average attendees, I'll tell them, subscribers to the YouTube channel. It's up to 96 on average, people that attend and watch remotely, and I think that's wonderful news, right? They may not be present physically, but they're watching online, or even better, they can watch it when it's convenient to them. And we all love the self-serve opportunities that are created there. So we could not do it without the competent clerks team that administrate council meetings. You see them working. Fingers are moving, lots of clicks occurring. And also, I do want to show that my appreciation for the IT team that in the background sit upstairs and monitor and make sure everything is of quality, and not only supporting your equipment in front of you, but obviously the AV equipment, and making sure our internet signal continues so that we can broadcast to the public. So that's a really important part. Okay, next slide, please. So pre-COVID, there's a slide, and it's an older slide. It's a historic view of the presentation online, YouTube channel, that's accessed through the iCompass solution. But it was mostly an event where people were in person, and there was a very static view, single camera view that's being presented here. And we did enable by this time, early 2019 timeframe, we'd have the public view rather, but it was very routine. It was a very standard view of what you see there today, and I show a little bit more information on the following slides. But I did want to mention, because so much of what we do at this town is we use the capabilities of staff. We try to maximize the knowledge of the team instead of relying heavily on vendors. Vendors are a good source of information sometimes when we don't have the answers, and staff are very good, especially the IT team, but right across the board, of finding solutions that offer very high value at low costs. And the AV solution in this room is one of those. It might be one of the best ones. To get to this point, it cost the town approximately $20,000. That I believe also included some of the furniture upgrades that were presented here. So it's not a lot of money on audio-video equipment. And so I'm going to demonstrate in the next couple of slides some other value opportunities that were part of the solutioning today. It doesn't mean that we're not open to changes. But based on the protocol we have today, the technology enables the protocol to be met, I think, in a very high-quality way. Next slide, please. So then we transitioned to COVID, and we all transitioned quickly, and we changed the protocol. And I think legislation, as noted in the bottom of the slide, also changed. So legislation changed to enable or allow or permit video production or video council meetings. And we introduced using existing technology. The virtual meetings that were part of the COVID were also using your laptops that were provided to you so you could perform your council business as well as your council meetings. So we didn't spend any more money. We used an enabling piece of technology they had already. And even to the point where eventually when we transition to the next phase, you're going to see that we use the cameras and the same technology again. So to enable COVID operations for clerks' meetings did not cost us $1, one additional dollar. Now, staff time is time, and there's a cost associated with it. But want to enable that, because I know a lot of other municipalities went a little different route. And we're proud of the solution that we have today. It might not be perfect, but it provides a lot of value. And I think it's fairly robust as well. If we could move to the next slide, please, Andrew. So then we transitioned to, I think, what I would call today's state, or the hybrid state, where there's options, and if members of council and members of the public are unable to be in person, then we've provided technology and solution and a protocol that supports that, where people can attend virtually. And that's the state we are in today. And we also added as part of this hybrid solution, we added a camera that's in front of me today, and we enabled some better features of the clerks and Madam Mayor and the council members. We've enabled a camera. At one point, it seemed we got used to having a camera on during the COVID operation, so we continue that here. And next slide's going to talk about some protocol changes that were made. But at the end of the day, to go into full hybrid mode that we are in today, we spent an extra $10,000. And I'd say 60% of that was because we discovered that one of our manufacturers for some hardware was possibly going out of business, and we needed some redundancy, so we grabbed some equipment. It's sitting on a shelf in the back room. But I'm saying again that we transitioned. We spent $30,000 to get to this point in time over the last 5 years. And again, I'm not going to keep leaning on the value proposition, but that's pretty good. Going forward, though, we may need to invest more based on if we make protocol changes. And that's the way we bring forward your requirements. Next slide, please. And so these were some of the summary of the protocol changes that were introduced as part of the hybrid operation. And we haven't, that I am aware of, made any changes to the protocol since that time frame. Okay. We use MS Teams. We're all familiar with that nowadays. I don't think we're ever going to get away from that. Our lives have changed for the better, I believe. We upgraded the microphones and stuff like that, you know. But at the end of the day, it's the same standard business suite that we call it, that you use in your daily lives, and we just integrated that into this protocol, in this environment. And what we'd like to propose through the next step slides is working with yourselves in discovery meetings to see if this protocol still works. Okay, so maybe next slide, if you could, Andrew. I'm going through this fairly quickly. I'm happy to stop at any time and take questions, and I can do it at the end as well. But over time, the pre-COVID view, again, top left-hand corner, and then the bottom right-hand corner is today's view. We believe it profiles yourselves, council members well, maybe not perfectly, but it also allows us to invite people from the public. So that's really the contrast from before COVID and then today's environment, which I would say is reliable, stable, right? We don't have a lot of production problems. Staff spend a lot of time care and control and monitoring the environment very well. And I think it's comparable to the other municipalities that I believe spend upwards of over $100,000, up to $200,000, and maybe even more for their audio video equipment in their facilities, in their chambers. Okay, so quite a difference in pricing, and we understand some that have recently installed their equipment. They're not as thrilled about it as so. The Cadillac's not always the best solution for the solution we believe. So next slide. I'd like to propose some next steps, and I'm open to receive others. Discovery meetings with councillors, to yourselves, to find out what protocol changes you'd like to see, or at least discuss, have tabled, have voted on, whatever is best for your individual needs and the needs of the group. And then through the protocol changes, your comments, we'll come back with a potential, capital project to make the changes required, and if they're required. And of course, we're going to come back to your council formally with a report back. A quick view, but I'm happy to take any questions, and thank you, Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you for the work that you've done to do this so inexpensively and pretty seamlessly. From our end, anyways. If you can just back up a slide. That was one or two back. One more back. There. That last indented bullet. When speaking, look into the MS Teams camera. So that's definitely written by someone who hasn't been up here doing the job.
Okay,
So
that's fair.
when I'm speaking, I'm trying to convince my colleagues of the point I'm making. I'm not looking into the camera, right? So that's the inherent difference, is that those of us who are seated on the end need to turn this way when we're talking, and I'm leaning over to my microphone, and the camera's now getting the side of my head. And so if you're asking me to also look at the camera and my microphone and convince the people over there, you're substantially adding to my workload here.
Well,
Okay? So you just have to think of the job we're trying to do. It's very easy to say, look into the camera, but that's not where the people are that I'm talking to. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Madam Mayor, of course, and it's a shortfall. In fact, I didn't want to change the protocol. This is older. It was caught more than once, that bullet, but didn't want to change too much because that's a historic protocol. I respect what you say, though.
I appreciate that, and I think that it's just important. Also, the picture that you grabbed, that was a good picture. I've got pictures of us where this one over here is like this, and someone down there is like this on their camera, and there's a lot of really bad pictures of us. So the one that you put in here, when we went from this to this, is like best case scenario, but 90% of the time, we're not looking like that.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, that's the screen capture utility tool that you all have access to, so you can just cut and paste this. You can grab any good image you want, so. But I didn't see it as a bad image, but I respect what you're saying. Thank you for that comment. Appreciate it, Councillor.
Just a point of personal privilege, Madam Mayor, just calling out my scoliosis. This is not, it is not disengagement. I require to stand up and move, and sometimes meetings are longer, and that's just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
It's a good screenshot because I'm not in it. What I wanted to say was that there's, obviously within the protocol, that was at a different time and place, and there's an inherent bias in this process towards in-person. And that's really hard for us to overcome. We will all wanted to be back here so that we could read each other's body language, that we could make eye contact with the presenter and engage with the people who are here in the room. For me, the biggest challenge, the camera that's here is a byproduct of what I'm doing. It's part of, I have to be aware of it so that I'm not, pulling at my ear or doing something strange. It adds to the level of formality because it's less than a foot away from my face. And that creates a tension that isn't always comfortable for everybody to be able to handle. So if there was a way of having it further away, maybe finding somewhere in between the way up high one shot and a collective, maybe it's a grouping of three. I don't know what that looks like, and I don't want to spend any more than we have to. I'm perfectly fine to continue. If it doesn't mean if it means we don't have to spend a lot of money, this is working. But I think we need to be acknowledging the fact that it's not a perfect stream. It is it's a tool towards transparency that's allowing 100 people on average to access, because they're not in here right now. Thanks.
Councillor Hay, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, through you, Madam Mayor. I'm of the opinion, again, I see things a little bit differently. I believe that people watching from home will be more engaged if they can see our facial expressions. So I'm fine with the close-ups, and it's about the substance of what we're saying, not the superficial issues of what we look like when we're saying it. But so the facial expressions are important, and body language is important. So in terms of communicating. They say that, well, one of the staff actually said to me that communication is 7% words and the rest is body language and tone and everything else in between. So I think the cameras are important to us doing our job.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Final questions? Thank you. So, staff, we will be booking meetings with the councillors to go over discovery, protocol changes, potential, garner your feedback more directly. Maybe I'll come to the table with some of the options that might service some of the camera options that we might have that are, again, cost-effective, offer extreme value, and provide a great result. So I'll have that ready when we organize the discovery sessions in the next 45 days, I imagine. Okay? That's next steps. Thank you, Madam Mayor, councillors. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Happy to move that, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. All those in favor? Oh. It passed. We have a confirming bylaw, be it resolved that bylaw number 2024-028 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of a special meeting of municipal council held on April 16th, 2024 be taken as read and acted and signed by the mayor and municipal clerk. All those in favor? Sorry. Moved by Councillor John, second by Councillor Crone. Thank you. What was that? I just was telling you what we had already voted. We have an adjournment on item G. Could I have a mover and seconder, Councillor Roy DiClemente and Councillor Johns? All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much, everyone.